by living in our heads, we have taken on the values of the cranial intelligence, which says intelligence is abstract reasoning. And we measure intelligence by giving people IQ tests, and that's what we're measuring. Intelligence is this huge spectrum, and abstract reasoning has a valid place on it, but intelligence is sensitivity. And that can be a sensitivity to a child's tears, sensitivity to your own breath. It can be a sensitivity to cloud formations, to music. It doesn't matter. They're all sensitivities. But once you understand that intelligence is sensitivity, then you begin to notice what is diminishing your sensitivity and what is promoting it. And you begin to allow yourself to feel, knowing that that is a resource of your intelligence. It's not just some emotional reaction. It is the thinking of your very being.
My guest for today's show is Philip Shepherd, author of New Self, New World, Recovering Our Senses in the 21st Century. He is also the creator of the Radical Wholeness Workshop, where Philip helps his students return to a wholeness of being by reuniting the unique insights of the head with the deep wisdom and genius that is found in the body. In our conversation, we talk about how there is an aliveness to life, a vitality, a vibrant energy that we all know from those times when we have had an experience in which we came alive. Perhaps when we witnessed a baby's birth, or let ourselves wander in a magnificent wilderness, or gave ourselves the freedom of an open-ended road trip to nowhere in particular. That rich aliveness is a feeling, and it is a feeling that we experience in the body, not in the mind. The mind doesn't do feeling. It does interpretation and analysis, it does perspective, it does ideas and questions, but the body is our most receptive tool for feeling the aliveness of life. Philip Shepherd's work helps us to recognize that many modern-day cultures have moved more and more toward a worship of the intellect and the analytical brain, while consequently losing connection with the deep, present, and calm intelligence of the body. I'm Chess Edwards, and this is Beyond the Noise, conversations at the heart of modern-day living. I interviewed Philip Shepherd in February of 2015. Well, good morning, Philip.
Good morning, Chess.
Good to have you here.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to join you for this conversation, wherever it might lead.
Yeah, well, I got turned on to your work through Jeff Brown, whose work I admire quite a bit, and he and I are scheduling an interview for later on in March, and he said, "Hey, in the meantime, yeah, you got to check out Philip Shepherd's work," and I went to your website and started to peruse around, and had the experience where, initially I thought you were talking about one thing, and then, which was intriguing enough. And then as I explored further, I went, oh, wow. This is really getting interesting.
Nice. So I'm glad that happened. Yeah.
Yeah. So, one of the things, Philip, that you point to is that we have really overvalued and over-accentuated the value of the intellect, the reasoning, analytical, thinking brain, kind of made it king, made it, as you often call it, the kind of the tyrant. And I'm wondering, if we have done so, what is it that then we have lost attention to, or devalued, or lost connection with?
Yeah, it's funny. Darwin says in one of his books, I assume it will be agreed that reason is the pinnacle of mankind's achievements. And he sort of blindsided himself in a way, and we've done the same thing. That, well, reason is brilliant, but you can't reason your way into love. You can't reason your way into the present. You can't reason your way into gratitude. It's a, you can't say, I should be grateful for this for these reasons. It's not how it happens. It's an opening of the heart. So what we've lost, and it's, just to be clear, the intellect has profound gifts to offer. It's just that those gifts um, come into balance when they're offered to the whole being. And our whole being includes that part of us that is intimately connected to the present, to the world around us, which is the embodied part of our intelligence.
Beautiful. So yeah, and I loved in reading your work. I mean, it really did paint such a clear picture of kind of a head centered focus. But this part of us that we've lost connection with, how do you describe that?
I think what we face in our personal lives and globally, all the major problems we face arise from this culture we've created, which is a culture of disconnection. And that disconnection, everything stems from that. So what we've lost is, in a way, our sense of wholeness. And by that I mean, what is the wholeness of the self? What's the wholeness of your being? What is that wholeness? And wholeness has no boundary. The wholeness of your being isn't something contained within your skin. The wholeness of your being is what you discover when you're fully present. The wholeness of your being lives in all your relationships. So really, in a sense, what we've lost is the guidance of the world. We're no longer informed by the present and carried by it and attuned by it, which is really, that may sound like an abstract concept, but when a football player, for example, has got that ball and he's in the zone, that's exactly the state he's in. The present is so clear and he's being guided by it. And there's no reason we can't conduct our lives in exactly that way, in that sense of being guided, except that we've sacrificed that, and we have to be like self-guided, that the intellect has to assess how to win, in the circumstances we've been dealt.
Well, when you're speaking to being in the zone, I think that's just a great way to describe it. I know that when I am, in the zone, just that, where I can let the intellect kind of set it aside almost as it's almost getting in the way because I need to tap into something else that is guiding me. I experience that as a felt perception. I mean, I feel that in my body. There's an aliveness, there is an engagement with the world around me where my whole body feels more alive. So, part of what we're disconnected from is this knowing ourselves, not just as an intellect, but as body wisdom, that we have wisdom in our body.
Well, yeah, it's interesting you touch on knowing ourselves, because it's sort of another, when you rely on the intellect, as we tend to do, it thrusts its values to the forefront. So when we think of knowledge, we think knowledge is going to save us, because that's sort of the strength of the intellect. And knowledge isn't going to save us. Knowledge, if knowledge were to save us, we'd be in great shape now relative to where our species was 500 years ago, say. And what we've demonstrated is that knowledge is actually lethal if it's not balanced by self-knowledge. And self-knowledge, again, the intellect has turned self-knowledge into a grocery list. Like, this is who I am. I like marmalade on my toast, and these are my values, and this is my favorite TV show.
This is what I do for a living, and I'm a father, I'm a mother, I'm a parent, I'm a teacher. My these are my identities.
Exactly. And that list really has nothing to do with self-knowledge.
And if we're primarily in the intellect, we're not giving ourselves access to to that knowledge, that self-knowing that can often arise through a body sensation.
Yeah, I mean the supposition of the intellect is that I can function more efficiently and more clearly if I buffer myself from all the avalanche of sensations within the body. And we tend to do that. To think clearly, we tend to close the door on what lies south of the neck. And the reality is that our profoundest thinking happens through those sensations of the body. There's a Latin verb sentire that shows up in English as sense and sensibility. And originally it meant to think, to feel. So what we've done is, we've separated thinking and feeling into these two different realms, and we can have one or the other. And in reality, as you surrender more and more fully to your own wholeness, you discover that you are feeling your thoughts. They're not uh, dry, clear cut, separated structures and abstractions. They are felt, they resonate through your body. And with that resonance comes a kind of clarity and a deeper kind of information than the intellect could ever even approximate.
See, this is why I was thrilled by your work. And all the clients that I work with, and in my own personal experience, this wholeness of being is just what you're talking about. That it's not separating out my thinking being, and then there's my feeling being, and sometimes I'm in this one, and sometimes I'm in that one. It's opening up a whole flow, I called it the other day with somebody I was working with, kind of the bully king of the intellect. That it's got to learn to get along. It's got to learn that there's other players in the game, and that there's a dance to be had, and it's not the only player out there. So in your work, you look at the problems that arise when we give too much value to the intellect and devalue and really don't have much of a connection with this self-knowledge of not only ourselves, but the world around us through the body, through a more whole experience. The problems arise. And I'm wondering if you can speak to some of those. And it seems that problems arise in our personal lives when we do that. Problems arise socially. Certainly problems arise environmentally. And where do you want to talk about the consequences of this disconnect?
One of the main areas in which it shows up, I sort of have come to understand that abstract reasoning, systemizing intellect in the head as the male pole of our consciousness. And counterbalancing that is this other brain we have in the body, this brain in the belly. And it's recognized, in many, many cultures as the seat of our profoundest truth. And and its strength is one that brings us into relationship. Its strength is one of empathy and feeling. And that, once you understand that within the body, each of us carries these poles of male and female, you can see how by separating ourselves from that deep knowing, that deep wisdom of the body, and relying so predominantly on the intellect of the head, we have suppressed the female side of ourselves, and that shows up everywhere in the world around us. We demean the female, we exploit the female. I mean, we exploit it in terms of natural resources. We don't feel them as living entities that we depend on. We think of the world as this warehouse, and there's no cashier. at the checkout, and you grab what you need and run out of the warehouse.
Help for a lot of folks, the idea of the masculine, feminine may not be as familiar. What are some of these characteristics of the feminine embodiment that we've lost touch with because it doesn't necessarily live in the head?
I associate the female side of our consciousness with being, that ability to reside in the present and feel its guidance and its particular calling. You've been born with this array of gifts that is on the earth in this configuration for the first time ever, and the world is calling to you to live those gifts, and we don't hear the call. Instead, we retreat into the head, where the strength is one of gaining perspective on the world and taking control. And we really have come to believe that the underlying purpose of our lives is to assert as much control as we can over finances, over relationships, over careers, and it's sort of endless, and it's something that is so deeply ingrained in us. It's really it's become hard to question it.
Well, I think what I hear you pointing to is that the part of the problem that arises is what you speak to in your work around the difference between control and harmony.
Harmony, my model for harmony is though it's called murmurations of starlings. Those huge flocks of starlings, like 250,000 birds in this cloud that itself looks like a living organism that kind of drifts and condenses and elongates and lifts. And it's the most extraordinary sight. Every starling in that flock is responsive to every other starling, every breath of wind, the trees and bushes, the sunlight, everything. So in that harmony of that flock of birds is revealed this larger harmony of the present around us. You compare that with control, where you're imposing a predetermined order on a system. And, to extend the analogy, well, what if you outfitted every one of those little starlings with a headset, and someone in the control tower is barking instructions at them to, bank right, lift left.
This would not work out well.
This would not end well. No. Yeah, so that's like, to me, that's control is an empty promise, and yet we've chosen to live our lives in service to it.
I believe that we are born with this connection. You watch children play, you watch their experience of the world, and they don't have the intellect yet. This is the beauty of being a child. You don't have the intellect yet, and your entire experience is a direct, visceral sensation of the world around you. When you were raised, that really impacted you. The fact that the world around you that you were born into, that we're really all born into, you had a real sensitivity to the fact that it had already divorced itself from this way of sensing itself in the world. And that's all that made sense to you, was just to feel the world around you. And your experience wasn't that in your community.
No, I really had the sense at a fairly young age that the adults around me were sort of acting out this fantasy, and they laid out all the treats for me to induce me to come and join them in it, and I couldn't do it. I really, the final straw for me, in the neighborhood I grew up, there were ravines and farmland, and with time they were developed. And there was this spring-fed creek that ran down through this little ravine, and they took this life-giving creek, and which was my favorite place to be as a kid, and they buried it in a sewer and laid a nice fresh cut lawn over the top of it and obliterated it.
Mm.
And with that, I thought, okay, the adult world is so cracked. I've got to escape, and it's little like Peter Pan. I won't grow up, except it wasn't that I didn't want to stay in childhood. It's that I didn't want my being, my sense of life and joy to be dimmed and sort of drawn down into this dull fantasy that was being lived out all around me.
Well, I mean, when you speak about that, I think it's just about every child's experience. At some point, they start to feel this disconnect. They start to feel this arbitrary nature of the world around them that isn't resonant with what it really means to be human, and that we all have our different ways of coping with that. For some, it creates a deep self doubt within them. God, what's wrong with me? Why don't I fit in? Why do I feel so different than what society wants me to be? Perhaps for others, it really creates this separation, this divide from the world, and that was part of my experience. I mean, I disappeared to the wilderness. I
Mm,
didn't trust people. I didn't trust the world of humans, and I escaped to the world of wilderness, which but I lived in the world of humans, so that was an issue I had to work with. Other people, numb or control or sedate their experience because it's so painful.
yes, yeah. I My own solution, as a teenager, I came to understand that what was killing me was the arbitrariness of my culture, which I was incapable of holding to account. I couldn't ask the questions of it that needed asking. And so my solution was to jump out of my culture. And I went to England and bought a bicycle and took off for Japan on my bicycle, and I went through Europe and the Middle East and India, and I passed through so many different ways of understanding what it means to be human. Um, and every single one of those ways is luminous and limited. And it was only ironically when I returned home that I suffered from culture shock, where the familiar suddenly was so bizarre. And it took me a long time to adjust, and I never fully adjusted. But what happened, I gained that ability that I needed to question the wallpaper of the space I'd grown up in.
So this experience that you had, I think so many of us have had when we go traveling and we come home. And I remember my first time coming home from my overseas adventures to Asia for 3 4 months. I came home and I was stunned by the supermarkets and
Mm,
by a culture that, again, like you said, seemed like it was the place that was out of balance. And I felt alienated from my own culture. One of our driving desires as human beings is we want to belong. We want to fit in. So how do we bridge this gap of suddenly I don't feel like I fit in or belong? And I think for a lot of people, it's kind of a capitulation. Like, all right, maybe I just need to really be better at playing this game.
yeah, I like that you use the word capitulation because, of course, it comes from the Latin word for head.
So you speak to the insecurity of being. And I hope you don't mind, but I've started to use that with my clients as well
Oh,
because
I
it,
love that.
it is just, it's so perfect because what you say about it is the insecurity of being disables us from ever feeling that we have enough. The present will always seem insufficient when we are insufficiently present. I love that. The present will always seem insufficient if we are insufficiently present. And so we try to offset our lack of being and the unsteady void it leaves at our core by trying to take from the world whatever might compensate. It's the hungry ghost theory. It's trying to feed an empty void that can never be fed by grabbing from the external world.
When you don't feel your being, then there's this hole inside of you that needs filling, and who knows what you might try to fill it with, but it's a process that has no end, because whether you reach, whether it's distraction or gambling or making money or alcohol or drugs or whatever you try to fill that void inside with, it you're throwing the wrong things.
Hmm.
What you need in your heart of hearts is to come back to your being.
Well, let's talk about that. Um, It reminds me of one of my favorite quotes. Michael Brown, The Presence Process, says that drama occurs when we ask others or ask the world to give us what we have not learned to give to ourselves. So all the drama of taking and consumerism and like you say, escaping into the different addictions that we have um, creates a lot of disconnect and drama. So how do we access this, Philip? In your work, that's primarily what you're working with people on in your workshops, is helping them reconnect with this essence of being. And you mentioned earlier, I think it'd be valuable to talk about this. You mentioned earlier the brain in our gut. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, because a lot of people aren't even aware of it. Medical science has been aware that there is an independent brain in the belly, and they've been aware of it for well over 100 years. And it's been suppressed because it has no place in our story of what it means to be human.
And what is brain? So brain in the belly. It's not a. It doesn't. It's not like we have the brain in our head and we have the exact same brain in our belly.
Good
So
point.
right. So
It's
what
not.
is this brain in the belly?
Yeah, it's funny. I see a lot of parallels between sort of the male female and the morphology and the function of the two brains. So there's this lump in the head, in the belly. It's called the enteric nervous system, and it's not a lump. You can't find it anywhere because it's this laced network of nerves that suffuse all the internal viscera. So you can't locate it and say, here it is.
So the physiology is, as I understand it, that there are neurons.
Oh,
That there
goodness, yes.
are neurons. This interlacing you talk about. It's a neural network. What is transpiring?
Well, it thinks, it feels, it decides, it acts. It's doing all of that. It's in, we call it the second brain. In fact, it's the first brain. It was there before we ever developed, the cerebellum and what lies between the ears. So it is the center of our life. Beyond that, it's something that is recognized in so many other cultures around the world as the seat of our being. If and this may sound strange to your listeners, but it's what I teach in my workshop, is how to take the center of your consciousness, which we tend to experience in the head, and allow that to drop down through the body. And it's like this tangible journey that you can feel as you allow it to descend down through the body. And it may run into blocks on the way, but then that's a little gift because you've discovered a shadow that needs your love, and then it drops a little further, and eventually your the center of your awareness can reside on the pelvic floor. And in my work, I'm even more specific than that. I talk a lot about the perineum. And the reason I mention that now is because the first book that was written on this brain in the belly was called The Abdominal and Pelvic Brain. And that pelvic part, there is such a density of thinking tissue right at the perineum that Byron Robinson, the guy who wrote this book, deemed it important to acknowledge that in the title of the book. And there, my goodness, you drop your consciousness down through the body to come to rest there, and then you open your eyes on the world, and it's revealed to be a completely different place. It's like when you're in the head, you experience yourself as a particle, and when you drop down into that place on the pelvic floor, you feel yourself as a node in a field, and the whole of the field supports you and informs you.
When you speak about following the consciousness, following the awareness and the attention, that's for me one of the most powerful things. And I've only discovered it primarily through my meditations, is that I can actually have a different experience of life and make different choices, not from the intellectual cranial brain, but from a different place within me when I track my awareness. And I love that, dropping it down through the body. Okay, now my awareness is in my heart. Okay, that feels different. Now my awareness is in my throat. That feels different. And dropping it down, down, down. And as you're speaking to that, I'm kind of tracking it in my body. And when I drop down into this pelvic region, it's like there's this whole world waiting for me there of, I don't know how else to describe it, but of knowing.
Yeah, knowing a world of presence and calm and limitlessness and specificity, and all those things are felt in such particular detail and ease at the same time. And I was just going to say, and that's contrasted when you're in your head. You open your eyes on a world that is a world of shattered bits and pieces that don't even cohere as a whole.
Well, the mind is constantly asking questions. So I may come up with a reasoned choice or decision. And my experience is that I may do that and I'm like, okay, got it. That makes sense to me in my head and I've made that choice. And 5 minutes later, that the exact same brain is still going, yeah, but I don't know. I mean, it's like constantly asking questions. That's its main job, is to analyze things. And so to go to another place where it's not analytical, because otherwise the brain is constantly analyzing even decisions I've already made.
Analysis is wonderful,
Mm-hmm.
but the strength of that faculty in the head is to gain perspective on the world around us. And in fairness, you can only gain perspective by stepping back from something. It's the separation that enables you to gain perspective on it. But that separation is where we've kind of locked ourselves, and we spend our lives in this belief that knowledge will save us, gathering more and more and more perspectives in the belief that if we just know enough, it'll all make sense, it'll all come clear, we'll have the answer. And we've forgotten as a culture what it even means to integrate. And that process of integration is what happens when you carry your perspective. So it's not a matter of abandoning your perspectives, it's a matter of literally carrying them down and allowing them to come in contact with the core of your being. And when that happens, they come into relationship with your wholeness, which is also the wholeness of the world that cradles you in its hands, and it finds its place. And then it doesn't need to go round and round and round. anymore. It informs the whole, even as the whole informs it.
One would not expect a poet or a dancer or anybody who is fully expressing in the world to do so only from an intellectual place, from an intellectual perspective.
I can speak as an actor because I'm an actor. I've spent all my life acting and studying theater around the world, and it's one of the primary things that drove me into this line of inquiry. Because if I'm on stage and I'm in my head, I'm dead. It just doesn't work. I've got to be living from another place.
There you go. There, and you had this experience, I believe, with the Japanese theater. It's one of the reasons you biked, that your destination when you were biking as a teenager through Europe and Middle East down to over to Japan, was because you had had an interaction with the No theater troupe from Japan. Is that correct?
Yeah, what happened? I'd read as a 16, 17-year-old some of the treatises from No Theater and never seen it. And then this play was coming to Montreal, which was like a 5-hour bus ride away. But I phoned and got a ticket and took the bus in Montreal. It was when I was 17 and saw this No play that reduced me to tears. It moved me so deeply. And at the same time, profoundly baffled me because I had no idea how they had wrought this effect on my heart. And that puzzle, that bafflement, um, is really ultimately what led me to Japan. There was something there that I had to understand, and so when I was in Japan, I spent months studying No theater, and one of the key things, or perhaps the key thing that I discovered, is the Japanese concept of hara. And hara is the Japanese word for belly. And in the Japanese culture, the belly is the seat of your deepest truth, your clearest understanding. So in No theater, every every gesture of the arm, every note that was sung was arising from this resonant place of truth that I'd never encountered before. So it was understanding how the entire performance could be generated from that resonant feeling, harmonious place, that led me really on my life's journey.
That loops me back. And just to be clear for folks, the No theater, if they want to look that up, is NOH, correct?
Exactly right.
The No theater. Yeah, and we've all experienced that. Watching somebody who's performing anything, and it's purely a performance. I've got the lines right, and I'm acting, to one who is embodying something and letting that embodiment, that feeling of embodiment, move through their performance. It's a very different experience for the
Yeah,
audience.
we tend to think, that a dancer trains to learn how to do a graceful gesture, but really what the dancer is training for is to open the body to the harmony of the present. So what you see as the dancer's arm extends is this present moment you're living in. You're not seeing a trained artifice of the dancer. You're seeing a surrender, through a body that is so finely attuned that the present is made visible in the grace of that movement.
You can listen again and share this show and all the Beyond the Noise episodes at our website, beyondthenoisepodcast.com. You can also find us on iTunes by searching for Beyond the Noise. My guest, Philip Shepard, is recognized as an international authority on embodiment. But just what does embodiment mean? And how does it figure into what it means to be human in the 21st century? Philip reminds us that it is a dangerous place to arrive, where we believe that we can reason our way out of the very same problems and issues that a primarily reason-based way of being has caused. He teaches us that the only way to truly have a harmonious relationship with the world around us is to learn how to interact with that world with the wholeness of our being. And that wholeness must include the body as the most resonant and intuitive tool we possess for feeling into true relationship with the world in which we live. Your definition of embodiment is a deep, present, and calm intelligence of the body. And dropped into that space, how we relate to the world around us is completely different.
Yeah, in that, I think of the body as a resonator. And what it resonates to is the energy of the world around it. And what we've tended to do is it's like if you have a bell and you stuff the bell full of cotton balls, it loses its resonance, right? That's what we've done. And so my work is largely about drawing those cotton balls out of the bell and just letting it live to the music of the world around it.
Mm. So let's look at that a little bit more. So one of the ways to drop into and know this body wisdom, the wisdom of the world through the body, I really want to honor the fact that you say that your work is not just about listening to the body. That's part of it because that's necessary, but it's about listening to the world through the body. So as you help us follow our consciousness and our awareness down to this pelvic bone, down to the depth of resonance within ourselves, it allows us to then feel the world around us and relate to it in a whole different way. In your experience with your students, what's the fear that people often need to kind of get beyond? Like, what are people afraid of? That if I surrender my intellect to a deeper relationship with the body, I'm going to start feeling. And is there a fear of it's going to be overwhelming? There's too much pain in the world. What's a sense of why people perhaps resist dropping into this deeper knowing of self?
I think a lot of it goes back to childhood. A lot of it goes back to, you're told as a kid, stop crying. Crying's bad. You're shut down. So many doors are closed as a kid, and you internalize this understanding that to yield to your feelings is childish and bad, and you will go out of control. So you have to keep them reined in. I'm not allowed to do this is a really big thing that I've seen in participants in the workshop. And I deal with some of that directly. And the other side of it is that, our culture says control is good and lack of control is bad. Well, lack of control is the only way in which you can venture into harmony. No surfer believes they are controlling the wave. They surrender to the wave and attune to it and dance on it. But that, there's a gap between standing on the shore and thinking, well, I'm not gonna jump into that water. There are big waves out there, and I'll be carried away. There's a skill gap between that and being able to go out with your board and stand up on it and just dance your way into shore on the wave.
And that's what I'm experiencing in the world is that far more people now are finding themselves standing on the shore looking at the waves of life and saying, you know what, this playing it safe, this controlling my environment and not diving in is really, I've been calling it freedom, and it's actually the biggest prison that I'll ever know.
There's this underlying message in our culture that communicates to us that freedom is disconnection. If you can disconnect, then things can't get to you. And that's what it means to be free. So this whole fallacy of having to earn enough money, to afford the gated mansion, this beautiful dream we have is precisely what you're saying. It's a prison. What the money enables is a kind of disconnection from the world. So you've suddenly got handlers and people can't get to you, and you've got a chauffeur, and you don't have to deal with any of that. And you're imprisoned by the very things that are being sold as freedoms. Give me a bike. Let me jump on my bike and take off into the city, and I feel so free in ways that I never could sitting in a car.
I love your quote that says, anything that increases our sensitivity increases our ability to live more intelligently.
That goes back to the fact that, by living in our heads, we have taken on the values of the cranial intelligence, which says intelligence is abstract reasoning, and we measure intelligence by giving people IQ tests, and that's what we're measuring. My goodness, no. You know, Intelligence is this huge spectrum, and abstract reasoning has a valid place on it. But in my understanding, intelligence is sensitivity. And that can be a sensitivity to a child's tears, sensitivity to your own breath. It can be a sensitivity to cloud formations, to music. It doesn't matter. It can be a sensitivity to arithmetic relationship. They're all sensitivities. But once you understand that intelligence is sensitivity, and even more specifically, intelligence is grounded sensitivity, because if your sensitivity isn't grounded, it can be reactive. It loses its capability of making coherent the things it's sensitive to. So if intelligence is grounded sensitivity, then you begin to notice what is diminishing your sensitivity and what is promoting it. And you begin to allow yourself to feel, knowing that that is a resource of your intelligence. It's not just some emotional reaction. It is the thinking of your very being.
Mm. You go on to say that grounded sensitivity equals the ability to be responsive. And I love that. You pointed to that if it's not grounded sensitivity, that it can be just, it can create just a lot of reaction in
Yeah.
the world rather than the actual, uh, I want to say thoughtful responsiveness, but thoughtful as in thought from the belly, the belly's thoughtful responsiveness. And then you go on to say our ability to feel the whole is directly proportional to our ability to become still within ourselves. And there's a quote that says, we cannot see our true reflection in running water.
Mm.
It is in still water that we can see our true reflection.
Yeah, I love that. The other image that comes to me is, if you're by a pond and it's a still day, you can see the merest insect landing on the surface of that pond as the ripples, are generated and slide through the water. If there's a breeze and the water's choppy, you wouldn't see a dragonfly hit the surface. You just wouldn't see it, because it's that quality of stillness that goes back to the resonance of the body. It's like the bell. If you're clanging away at a bell and then you bring a second mallet and give it a little tap, you're not going to hear it. It's the stillness that allows that tone to resonate and be felt through
Mm.
the whole.
What would be different in the world, Philip, if we allowed ourselves to have more grounded sensitivity?
Well, if we had more grounded sensitivity, we would find guidance in the world, and we would love the present, and we would recognize with gratitude the quality of enough. And then everything would change, because our very economic system is posited on growth. there's never enough. There's not enough money. There's not enough information. There's not enough technology. There's no line in the sand that says this is enough. And so what happens to an economy that has to grow? If it doesn't grow, it's a disaster. It's a recession, or even worse, it's a depression. So it has to grow. It has to grow. And excuse me, we're on a finite planet. It's not a tenable model. And if we could each learn for ourselves the richness, the lusciousness, the ease, the bounty that comes with that grounded sensitivity, we would be able to back off from what is driving us and making us anxious and feel isolated and confused, and we drop into a harmony that is already here. And then you begin to understand that it's not just a harmony that you can join. It's a harmony that is asking for help. And you can guide and assist the harmony of the world around you in so many ways, little ways that might be just smiling at someone you pass on the street, and major ways that might take a lifetime devotion, but it's in service.
If I drop down into that wholeness of being, the experience I have is one of feeling richly and deeply and unquestionably connected to all of life. And in that space, it's very difficult to maintain the illusion of us and them,
Yeah.
of separation. So it's a lot harder for me to turn a blind eye to injustices or um, to a sense of alienating or vilifying, others with whom I share this planet. It's a lot harder for me to turn a blind eye to a deforestation or to any imbalance, so that any imbalance in the world order is an imbalance that I feel within myself.
Absolutely. We've got this dream of independence, that is deeply aligned with the dream of the tyrant. And the reality is, there's no such thing as independence. You depend on every aspect of the world around you. You depend on it for your own sense of reality, but you depend on it the way a tree depends on the soil and the minerals and the rain, and so the seas, and so the moon. There is no line you can draw between you and anything around that says, well, I don't depend on this. And so to come to that place of grounded sensitivity, that in which you can feel that connectedness, is to come to reality.
In your travels, Philip, what cultures have you found that embody wholeness, embrace and align around wholeness the most?
As you say that, I think of, uh, I guess you'd call them peasants in Ecuador, who were just present in a way that they were resting within their own wholeness. And I find a similar thing. I think of people in India I met who, man, I'm riding my bike through India in the middle of nowhere, and I'm kind of needing directions, and I ask this couple for directions, and they help me. Yes, you're on the right road, and then they say stop, and they go back to their hut and bring me out these two sweetmeats. These are people who have almost nothing and are offering me this gift because their hearts are just present, and they were drawn to do that. They were in a place of wholeness that May I venture to say, many CEOs, if they actually knew the truth of their lives, would trade places for to have that sense of peace and gratitude and welcoming of what the present unfolds.
When I've had that experience in all of my travels, it's always been the sense that the person I encountered who was so welcoming and generous already not only saw me as, but already felt me as and knew me as them. There was no separation. They're not separated from their environment. They live closer to the land. They feel the oneness already, not just with other human beings, but with everything that has energy.
Absolutely, they've because they haven't divided themselves from the world. They're attuned to that truth. It reminds me of the Mayan greeting in Lakesh.
No,
Well, we meet someone in the street, we say, hello, hello, and they say, in Lakesh, in Lakesh. In Lakesh translates as, I am another you. And that's what they say over and over in the course of their day to the people they meet. I am another you.
beautiful. And of course, in Nepal, namaste.
Yes,
I honor the God within you. I honor the place within you that is the same as the place within me.
yes.
I visited a monastery once in the high Himalayas, and the Rinpoche there. When I was about to leave, I was working with a translator because he spoke a really wild dialect,
Oh,
and I asked, ask the Rinpoche if he believes in Shangri La because I was way up, close to kind of these hidden lands, and he asked the Rinpoche, and he says, yes, yes, there is a Shangri La. I said, cool. Ask him where it is. And he said, north of here. I said, oh, Tibet. He said, no, no, north of there. I'm like, well, Mongolia, the Taklamakan Desert. No, no, north of there. Like North Pole? No, no, keep going. And I'm like, yeah, but on this planet, right? Yes, on this. And I said, well, if I keep going, I end up back in the United States. And he said, yes. And I was quite disappointed. And I said to my translator, I said, ask him if he's ever been to the United States. And he said, no, I've never been. I said, tell him he's been sorely misinformed. It's not Shangri-La. And he said, no, think about it. You have all this, you have comforts, you have roofs over your head, you have running water, you have all of these, you have education, medicine, you have all these amenities, and you have simply forgotten that there's a whole nother part of life to be had. You don't have to give up one for the other, but just you have to combine them both. And imagine if you did, you very well might have Shangri-La.
oh, that's beautiful.
And I appreciate what you said earlier about not saying, it's not about the intellect and we have to, dash the intellect. No, it's incredibly valuable. But to recognize it's not the one and only thing that we have available to us for knowing ourselves in the world and the world around us.
Exactly right.
So as we start to wrap up here, Philip, what is perhaps one of the most foundational, simple, clear messages or takeaways that if we remembered nothing else, what would be one of the things that would serve us best to bring into our awareness?
So the answer I would give is one that brings us into relationship. And one of the most profound ways of coming into relationship is through gentleness. Because gentleness isn't a quality you possess within yourself. Gentleness is a quality of exchange. When you move a child's arm gently, you are so aware of that child, and you're feeling all of that. It's the gentleness that enables it. So there's so many ways of dropping more deeply into relationship through gentleness, to see the world gently, to allow the breath to drop into your body and release out gently, to listen to someone gently. It's such a simple thing, but it really has the power to change everything else.
Thank you, Philip.
It's been such a pleasure, Chess. Thank you.
It really has been for me too, and I so appreciate the work that you do. Anytime you're asking to create a new definition of normal, that's a big undertaking.
It sure is. Thank you so much, Chess.
Thank you, Philip. To learn more about Philip Shepherd and to read his articles and books, or to work with him personally or attend one of his workshops, you can visit www.philipshepherd.com. That's Philip with one L, shepherd.com. To work with me for mindfulness coaching or mindful leadership coaching, or to attend one of my workshops or international retreats, visit chessedwards.com. You can listen to this episode again and all of our interviews on iTunes and at our website, beyondthenoisepodcast.com. I'm Chess Edwards, and this is Beyond the Noise, conversations at the heart of modern day living.